room, including me, know a lot of people who would vote for Donald Trump, but only if they actually showed up. And so we've got to do the hard work necessary to make sure they show up. And look, we know these folks. They don't pay that close attention to politics, but they're good people. They take care of their families. They do a good job at work. Let's just make sure they get out there and vote. And here's the final thing I want to ask you before we take some questions. Every single one of us has a voice. And whether we're on social media or whatever social media platform that we're on, whether it's just sending text messages, sending emails, or making phone calls, we all have the ability to be what I'll call a force multiplier for the Trump campaign. And here's what I'd like you to do. Whether it's right now or whether it's when I'm taking questions from the reporters, take out your phones, take a photo, post it on social media, and say why you're voting for Donald J. Trump for president. Because think about this. We've got, I don't know, it looks like over 1,000 people in this room. That's a guess. But if every single person reaches 100 people, that's 100,000 people. That's 100,000 people that we can cut through the BS and we can cut through the dishonesty of the press, and we can just get the message that we're going to make this country great again. And I really do believe that after 3 years of the Kamala Harris failure, Pennsylvania is going to make Donald Trump the next president, and we are going to unleash a golden age of prosperity in this country. And it's up to us. If you want higher inflation, more chaos, and more open borders, well, Kamala Harris is your gal. But if you want a golden age of American prosperity, if you want affordable housing and groceries, a peaceful world, and a secure southern border, let's get out there and make Donald J. Trump our next president. God bless you all. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Remember, I'm so grateful for the warm reception. I'm not getting out of here just yet. We'll take some questions from the reporters. And what I'd ask here is that we start out with folks who are local. I think we have a little time here, so I'll try to answer as many questions as we possibly have. But let's start with a few local reporters.
Hey there, Senator. Peter Zampa, Gray Television. First, a couple of days ago, former President Trump suggested that if necessary, the military step in and handle what he calls the enemy from within on Election Day. What exactly does that mean?
Yes.
And then second, if I
go ahead.
Oh, you can answer that one first if you like.
Yeah, let me answer that question and ask your second question. So first of all, and this is not meant to be a criticism of you. It's meant to be a criticism of the media writ large. Is the media likes to hang their hat on something that Donald Trump said. They take it out of context, and instead of focusing on the fact that gas prices are 45% higher than when Kamala Harris was president, over the last 3.5 years of Kamala Harris's leadership, or that groceries are 25% higher thanks to Kamala Harris's leadership, or that housing prices in Pennsylvania are about 50% higher. They focus on these things instead of on the issues that the American people actually care about. And I think we can do so much better by talking about the issues and the substance. But I want to answer your question. Here's what Donald Trump was saying. We all saw this. We all saw this in the summer of 2020, and I believe that the number is $13 billion of damage, and 20 lives were lost, most of them police officers, in the rioting that happened in the summer of 2020. We have various far-left activists who are talking about civil unrest in this country if Donald Trump were to be elected president again. If you have people who are rioting in American streets, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, whatever their political persuasion is, we're not going to let that happen. We believe in law and order in this country. That's what Donald Trump is talking about, and I think it's very simple. Second question.
And the second question, what message do you think it sends to independent voters when you do not directly answer the question, did Donald Trump lose in 2020?
I think, sir, look. First of all, on the election of 2020, I've answered this question directly a million times. No. I think there are serious problems in 2020. So did Donald Trump lose the election? Not by the words that I would use. Okay? So look, we could, but look, I really couldn't care less if you agree or disagree with me on this issue. And here's the thing that I focus on, because what the media will do, they'll focus on the court cases or they'll focus on some crazy conspiracy theory. What I know, what verifiably I know happened, is that in 2020, large technology companies censored Americans from talking about things like the Hunter Biden laptop story, and that had a major, major consequence on the election. Now, let's take that as a baseline reality. Even the journalists who constantly fact-check me admit that that's real. Well, okay. You could say, well, let's say your view is that happened and we still think Trump lost, or that happened and we think that means Trump won. Who cares? It happened. Censorship is bad, and that's the substance of what we're focused on, and that's what we care the most about. And here's the final point that I'll make is, you know what I care a lot more about than what happened 3.5 years ago? Is what Kamala Harris has done over the last 3.5 years and what she's going to do if the American people give her 4 years in office. It's a disaster. We know that it has led to terrible, terrible consequences for the American people, and that's what we're focused on. And, you know, one final observation here. I've been asked just in the past 2 weeks, I think I've been asked probably 8 or 9 questions about 2020. And I give an honest answer because I think it's important to ask the question or to answer the questions that are asked. But how many questions have I been asked about why Pennsylvanians can't afford gasoline? I've been asked Thank you. I've been asked very, very few questions about why Pennsylvanians can't afford food and can't afford housing. And here's the simple reality is we can agree to disagree on a whole host of issues, but our message to Pennsylvania independents, to Pennsylvania Republicans, and to Pennsylvania Democrats is very simple. If you want a secure southern border and you want to be able to afford the American dream again, Donald Trump and I have a plan for you, and we will fight for you, and that's our message to voters down the stretch.
Hi, Senator. Jake Sarwar from Fox 56 Wolf. Just wanted to know how the Trump-Vance administration would plan to improve the education system, including keeping necessary leadership activities like Future Farmers or even FBLA, the Future Business Leaders of America.
Yeah. And what's the second question? Did you have a second question?
I do. It's unrelated to education.
Okay, fine. Okay, yeah. I'll answer this question. Look, it's first of all, we're motivated by the simple principle that every child, rich or poor, deserves to have a high-quality education in the United States of America, and we are failing our kids right now. We're failing our kids in a big way. Now, we're failing our kids in a couple of important ways. Number one, we've got a lot of taxpayers coming from the Department of a lot of tax money coming from the Department of Education that is funding radical curriculums instead of funding the curriculums that are going to teach our kids how to read, how to write, and how to do arithmetic. We got to get back to common sense education. The second very basic principle is that we believe that every Pennsylvania child, and especially their parents, ought to be able to decide, to choose for themselves where those kids go to school. So we believe in school choice. And we believe that if we empower parents more with more choices, that's how you best preserve those programs for kids because they matter. They teach character. They teach virtue. They teach the skills that are necessary for a life of success and of happiness. That's why they exist in the first place. And I think the reason why a lot of them are under stress is because we've got Department of Education bureaucrats instead of parents making the right decisions for their kids. We're going to change that. And I know you had another question.
So Pennsylvania, specifically here in North Central and even in Northeastern, has abundant resources and manufacturing plants.
Sure.
How in a Trump-Vance administration would you really, try to enhance that role that they play in the communities?
Yeah, very, very important question. Well, You know, we are sitting, and I imagine you all know this better than I do, we are sitting on the Saudi Arabia of natural gas right here in the state of Pennsylvania. It's an amazing resource. And again, the contrast between these two candidates and these two visions could not be different. Kamala Harris wants us to buy oil and gas from tin pot dictators all over the world. Donald Trump wants us to buy it from our own people, our own workers, and our own territory. Drill, baby, drill. That is the way to achieve energy independence. But, you know, the energy, so two ways you got to protect manufacturing. First connects to energy, so let me address that. We all know that one of the biggest drivers of cost for our manufacturers is energy, right? If you're manufacturing steel, you use a lot of natural gas because you can only manufacture steel at really high temperatures. That's true for almost any manufactured product. So if we unleash Pennsylvania energy workers and we lower the cost of energy, I believe this is why we talk about a golden age of prosperity. We're going to have a manufacturing renaissance, the likes of which this country has not seen in 150 years. We're going to rebuild the greatest industrial power in the world, and we're going to start with Pennsylvania energy as the foundation. But the final point, just to echo something I said earlier, is it goes back to tariffs, because if you've got foreign countries using slave labor to undercut the wages of American workers, you've got to make those countries pay a big fat penalty, and that's all a tariff is. That's a big part of it, too. Next question.
Hi, Senator. My name is Sabrina Barner. I'm with the Standard Journal in Milton. A lot of people might see the state of this country as hopeless or nearly hopeless. So what would be your words to them, especially to young people who feel like they have no chance at the American dream?
Well, I appreciate that question, Sabrina. And look, I frankly know how a lot of those kids felt, because I grew up in a pretty rough family, and we didn't always have a whole lot of money. And I remember there were times where I looked to the future and wondered whether things were ever going to get better than they were, you know, when I was a teenager, when I was growing up and living with my grandmother who was struggling in very big ways. And I think that my message to them, most importantly, is don't give up on yourself. One of the things that I've come to appreciate is that, yeah, while sometimes we had it awfully rough and sometimes we were pretty poor, that in a lot of ways it gave me a perspective on the world that I wouldn't have had if I'd been born with a silver spoon in my mouth. And so I think that we take, you know, in this country, we take the good with the bad, and I think in some ways it can be a blessing to have to persevere through very tough circumstances. And I encourage people who feel like the American dream is out of reach, persevere. Never give up on yourself. That's the first thing I'll say. But the second thing that I'll say is that while we got a lot of people who are living paycheck to paycheck, who can't afford to pay off their credit cards, who are struggling and worrying about the future, don't give up on yourself. But my job as your next vice president is to make it just a little bit easier for you to work hard, play by the rules, and get ahead in this country that all of us love. And I know there are a lot of people out there who feel like the American dream is unaffordable. I talk to a lot of young families, you know, young couples who'd like to buy a home and start a family, have a baby, and they feel like they can't because things are too expensive. One of the things that I promise is that when Donald Trump is in the White House, we will fight every single day for you. We'll fight to make the American dream more affordable, and we will rebuild the greatest engine of prosperity the world has ever seen. We got to get better leadership in there, so go and vote for Trump. That's the final thing I'll say. Go and vote for Trump by November 5th. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thank you, Senator Vance. My name is Arjun Singh with the Epoch Times. Across Pennsylvania, Vice President Harris has been talking a lot about abortion rights, an issue that you and President Trump believe should be left to the states to decide.
Sure.
But that question is different from what you think the states should do once it's in their hands and what you believe is morally right or not. Here in Pennsylvania, it's possible to get an abortion up to 24 weeks of pregnancy, which is about the same as it was under Roe versus Wade. Do you think that law is moral or not, and why?
Well, Arjun, look, I think that even whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, we should all be able to say that aborting a late-term baby for no reason, you know, sometimes it's necessary because of the health of the mother, the life of the mother, but aborting a late-term baby is not something that we should take lightly in this country. And I don't like that. I really do not like that. And I think it's important to say. Now, Arjun, I, of course, come at this from a different perspective from Kamala Harris and a lot of Democrats. I want us to protect every vulnerable life in this country, and I think that's really important. But the reason why, I mean, think about this. The way that we do that is we ensure that each state is able to make its policy the way that it thinks it should. So I'm not going to tell Pennsylvanians what they should do in the same way I'm not going to tell Californians, and I'm not going to tell Alabamans exactly what they should do. I think it's important to realize the real contrast between this is that Kamala Harris wants to renationalize this issue. She wants taxpayer-funded abortion at the 9th month, and which is disgusting. Donald Trump wants to preserve the right of the states to make these decisions. He, in other words, wants to preserve the right of voters to make these decisions, and that's a big difference between him and Kamala Harris. Next question.
JD, the question is about health care.
Yes, sir.
Trump care never hit the ground running, and we'd like to hear what your policy would be on health care.
You know,
because we're one family away from a really big bill, one bad medical incident.
And look, our message to Pennsylvania families is that President Trump is going to have your back. And he did have Pennsylvania families back during the first Trump administration, because a lot of folks don't remember this, but President Trump inherited, and I'm talking about the private health care exchanges, those exchanges were in a bit of a death spiral because the health care that was offered was so bad that people wouldn't sign up until they got very sick. And that's a terrible way to actually run a health insurance program, and that's what we were doing in this country. And Donald Trump implemented a number of reforms to make health care more stable in this country. And I'm not going to say that we fixed everything, because there's still a lot to do. But the guiding principle of Donald Trump's health care plan is, number one, we want people to be able to choose a health care plan that makes sense for their family. Number two, we want them to be able to choose a doctor and keep their doctor, not have their health insurance plan strip their doctor from them. And number three is we want transparency and the prices that people are paying. There's no service in the world where you go in and you have no idea what you're actually buying or how much you're actually buying it for. And we think that's one of the main reasons that the health care is broken. And by the way, this looks or presents very different problems depending on the issue that we're talking about. Okay, so let me give you an example. You go into a hospital, you have a young family, and I've heard this story so many times. The young family has a baby, and they're right at the moment where the woman needs pain medication, and then they choose an out-of-network provider, and they get home, they got a $20,000 surprise medical bill. We got to cut that crap out. We got to stop that. Make sure that people know what they're buying, know what they're paying for. That's really important. But then let me give you another illustration of this problem. You all would probably be shocked to know, or maybe you wouldn't, that Europe pays lower prices for drugs that were invented in this country than Americans do. Well, that's unfair, and that's ridiculous, and Donald Trump's going to change it. In fact, he fought to change it his first 4 years, and then Biden and Harris undid all of his important work. People don't give Trump enough credit for this, but towards the end of his administration, he really took on Big Pharma so that Americans would pay lower costs for prescription drugs. He wants Europeans, in the same way that Europeans have to pay more for their own defense, they've also got to pay a little bit more for their own health care and stop freeloading off the United States of America. That'll lower costs for Pennsylvanians, and that's an important thing we got to do too. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Dave Kennedy from the Williamsport Sun-Gazette. What would you like to do specifically to get people, young people, the opportunity to go to trade schools more, not necessarily
yes, sir.
Four-year academic, but we need welders, we need all that kind of folks as well.
Yes, we do.
What specifically would you do? And I do have another question.
Yeah. Look, man, I was raised by a union welder in Armco Steel in Middletown, Ohio, and trust me, he was a hell of a lot smarter than almost any person I've ever met. And it's tough work, but it's not just work with the hands, it's also work with the mind. And look, I think one thing is leaders got to do a better job of talking about this stuff. We've had a generation of young people, and I was taught this message. I'm 40 years old. When I was going to high school in the 90s, there was this idea that there was work with your hands and there was work with your head, and they were somehow totally different. Talk to a union pipe fitter who can do trigonometry better than a mathematics professor. Work with your hands and work with your head is often the same kind of work, right? And that's an important thing to remember. We got to get more people in the trades, but we got to be honest, the financial support for people who want to go to trade school is just not there in the same way that everybody who wants to go get a 4-year degree. And I happen to think that if you want to go and become an electrician or a pipe fitter or a welder, or you want to work in carpentry, you ought to be able to get the same benefits as somebody who goes to a 4-year college. We got to be equal across everybody. And sir, that comes when things like Pell Grants. You can't get Pell Grants if you want to go to trade school. That's 529 accounts. You can't really use those for trade school. We've got to just give everybody the opportunity to choose the life that they want. And then at the same time, leaders have got to talk a lot more about the fact that there is honorable, great, smart work in the trades. And we've got to do a better job of communicating that message as leaders of this country. Next question, sir.
Kind of going along with those ideas about Made in America. There are a lot of people concerned about the cost of tariffs being passed along to U.S. consumers because, as we both know, tariffs are paid at the U.S. ports, not by countries, but by companies when goods are imported into the U.S. How do you all plan to address that?
Yes, sir. So I understand the question, but I think I disagree with the premise in this way, that the assumption that tariffs always lead to price increases for consumers ignores that companies only pay the tariffs if they decide to manufacture overseas in the first place. And this was, Trump. I mentioned that. I mentioned the president, made this argument or did this great interview yesterday. And again, I'd encourage you all to watch it. But this guy who's interviewing kind of asked the same question that you just asked, sir. And he says, "Well, these tariffs, these companies are going to pay all these tariffs." And Trump said, "No, they're not." And the guy kind of looks at him kind of confused. And Trump says, "They're not going to pay anything so long as they make it in America." And that's the whole point of a tariff in the first place, is to make more things in America. But I think we really ignore the costs, the long-term costs, and sometimes the short-term costs of letting other countries make all of our critical stuff. And sometimes it's hard to put a dollar value on this stuff, and sometimes it's really easy to put a dollar value on this stuff. Because remember, at the height of the COVID pandemic, when we were trying to get hospital gowns and masks, and I'm not talking about masks for 3 years old, I'm talking about masks in hospitals for doctors to use when they're doing surgery, and we couldn't get that stuff because the Chinese and other countries made it. So everybody said, well, if you just let the Chinese make everything, it's going to lead to cheaper and cheaper goods. Well, the Chinese are making more of our stuff today than they ever have, and frankly, things are more expensive than they should be. That's a fault of Kamala Harris's leadership and a generation of failed leadership in this country. Donald Trump is going to change it. We're going to make more of our own stuff, and we're going to actually get better prices for consumers in the process. Why don't we take just 2 more questions here?
Yeah, Senator Torian with CBS News. After just saying that you do not believe Donald Trump lost in 2020, what would you... What would you need to see in November to give you the assurance that it's a secure and safe election?
Well, Torian, look, I'm not worried about it because, again, I think that we've done a lot of work here in 2024 to make our elections, to make sure that every legal ballot is cast and every legal ballot is counted. I think, number 2, you don't have technology companies interfering in the election in the same way they were in 2020, though they still are a little bit, and I think that's a problem, Torian. And so to me, the fundamental question is not what do I need to see. The fundamental question is, let's agree, Democrat, Republican, or Independent, we are done with censorship in this country. We're going to protect everybody's First Amendment right to speak. And if we do that, you'll give way more credibility to the 2024 election than anything that I can stand up here and say in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. We'll do one more question.
Thank you for doing this. My name's Hannah. I'm with ABC. My question for you is, are you concerned about election misinformation and the impact it could have on the cycle and turnout? And if no,
Yeah.
why not?
Oh, look, Hannah, that's a good question. Yes, I am worried about it. In fact, I talk to people every now and then who will come up to me and say, well, you know, there are too many problems out there. We don't trust the people who are going to count our ballots, and, you know, so I'm not going to get out there and vote. That's the exact opposite attitude you should be taking. If you're worried about what's going on in this country, get out there and vote, but then do more than that. Go volunteer to be a poll worker. Go volunteer to knock on doors. Go volunteer to participate in this democratic process, because if you don't, there's nobody coming to save us. It's all up to us to save this country, the people in this room. And here's something else that I think people don't realize is if you're a local voter in a place like Williamsport, the people who are counting your ballots are often your neighbors. And again, it's the local elections, and especially in our small and rural areas, it's your neighbors who are counting these votes. It's your neighbors who are counting these ballots, and I think that we got to focus on the real problem. The real problem is 2 weeks ago, Democrats killed a bill that would have made it harder for illegal aliens to vote. Right? That's out there in the open. So we got to be, of course, vigilant about that, but we got to make sure that we pass the laws to ensure that every legal ballot, but only the legal ballots count. And the second thing that we got to do is look, we all know what happened. 2020 was the censorship election. They silenced stories and then bragged about it that we know had a big effect on the election. I think that the solution to censorship is for us to get out there and speak our mind and speak it loudly. Don't be afraid. Don't let them silence you. And that's how we defeat censorship in this country. So, look, I want to just leave you with one final thought here, because that was our last question. So, as I mentioned, my wife and my son are running around here somewhere, and I will tell you that one of the coolest things about this, meaning running for vice president, is I get to see this country through the eyes and through the perspective of my family. And especially for a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old, those are our 3 kids, you see America with a totally fresh set of eyes, and that's an incredible blessing and a very, very amazing thing. And you know, we got off the plane, and I don't know, you know, the airport's probably about 15 minutes from here. I don't think I've ever been to this airport, but we look at these mountains as soon as we get off the plane, and they're orange and red and yellow, and all I can think is, my God, what a beautiful part of our country. What a great day to be here in Pennsylvania. But you think of that beauty, and you think of the incredible natural resources that we have, and then most importantly, think of just the people every single day, waking up, building the things that we rely on, serving in our military, keeping our communities safe. We have got the greatest country in the history of the world, but it's only going to stay that way if we fix the broken leadership in Washington. So what I want all of us to do over the next 20 days is do everything that you can. Fire Kamala Harris, send her back to San Francisco, and make Donald Trump the next president of the United States. God bless you guys. Thank you all. I love you, Pennsylvania.
Why don't we liberate these United States? We're the ones who need it worst. Let the rest of the world help us for